Hi, everybody. Looks like we've got a lot of people on the line now, so we'll go ahead and get started. As I mentioned, my name is Hitta. I'm a program manager here at Earthwatch, and I'd like to welcome you to the fourth Earthwatch webinar. Today, we're gonna, as you can see on your screen, we're going to hear from Dr. Miriam Stark and Dr. Alison Carter. They're conducting research in Cambodia, and they're both what we call PIs, that's principal investigators, for the Earthwatch expedition Unearthing the Ancient Secrets of Angkor in Cambodia. So you can see Miriam's day job here. She's a professor of anthropology at the University of Hawaii, and Alison is also a professor, and she's at the University of Oregon. And they come together to meet Earthwatch volunteers in Cambodia. This is a particularly exciting webinar, I think, because this is a brand new project. No Earthwatch participants have been out yet, but it'll be getting started in 2018. So it's exciting to have this sneak preview of what's coming up next year. I mentioned earlier, this is the fourth webinar. We've had 3 before, and if you missed them, you can actually go onto Earthwatch's YouTube channel and watch the previous ones if you want to see what you missed out. They range in topics from sharks in Belize to studying climate change at the edge of the Arctic in Canada. So a lot of really cool stuff out there. A couple housekeeping items on the settings of how to use Zoom, because some of you might be new to it. You'll see that there's some buttons along the bottom. There's a chat window. If people have issues or questions with things, we can help you out with any technical difficulties. There's also a Q&A function, and I encourage you to use that to submit your questions. The webinar is going to be about 45 minutes of Miriam and Alison speaking with slides and this presentation, and then we'll do a Q&A at the end. So we'll use the questions that you submit there. You can write them as they're talking, as things come into your head, or you can put them in at the end when we're having more of a conversation. I'll read off questions from that when we get to the end. I think that's all for housekeeping. So from here, I'll turn it over to Miriam and Alison to get started.
Hi there, I'm Miriam, and I'll be starting off this project presentation, and then I'll hand it off to Alison. It's a very collaborative project that we have in every way, so my goal here is just to provide a little bit of framework and then to go from there to telling you about the kind of social context in which we're doing our work. We're really excited to work with Earthwatch. We've been running field work in Cambodia now for quite some time, and through the Greater Angkor Project, this is our second phase with them. So I wanted to make sure that we give credit to all of our in-country collaborators. I temporarily can't see the screen, but I'm sure Alison's going to click this to the second slide there. We want to first give our shout out and appreciation to Apsara Authority, which is like the Park Service for Cambodia. And all of our work that's done at Angkor is done in collaboration with them, and also in collaboration with our Australian colleagues at the University of Sydney, University of Flinders, and so on, because we're part of the Greater Angkor Project, which has also a major grant from the Australian Research Council. You can see that we also work with National Geographic funding, Dumbarton Oaks, Center for Khmer Studies, and so on. So deeply collaborative project. I wanted to introduce the people on the bottom of this image that you can see. Pipal Heng can't join us right now because he's finishing writing his dissertation here under my direction at the University of Hawaii, but he's a major field collaborator as well. And Chai Rachna can't join us because he's sleeping. He lives in Siem Reap, Cambodia, and he's our primary Apsara Authority colleague. Then you can see me and you can see Alison. And the 4 of us work together in the field and do research, and we also run training programs for students, primarily students who are from the Archaeology faculty of the Royal University of Fine Arts. So that's part of our team. We have actually a much larger team when you involve the technical specialists, other people who work with us who are Cambodian, and we do also encourage participation by graduate students who are from Southeast Asia working elsewhere. So were you to come with us into the field, you'd see all of us characters and more. I'm going to turn this over to Alison now, and she'll provide you with the general outline of our research. I'll come back and talk about the collaborations with OPSR in a bit.
All right, hi everyone. So just to give you a little outline of what we're going to talk about on our webinar today, I'm going to give you an introduction and background to our research project and some of the research questions that we're aiming to answer with our field work. In order to do that, I'll give you a bit of a background on Angkor and how our work in particular is tying into ideas or shifting ideas about the collapse of the Angkorian civilization. We're going to be looking at households, so we'll be talking a little bit about how this type of archaeology, which we call household archaeology, can contribute to these questions. I'm going to give a little bit of background on some recent field work that we did, and then we'll discuss what our planned field work is for 2018 and how Earthwatch volunteers or citizen scientists can be a part of this. So I'm guessing that a lot of people who are on the webinar right now might already have some familiarity with Angkor, but just in case this is new for people, I wanted to give a bit of a background on what we mean when we say Angkor. So when we talk about Angkor, we're referring to a few different things. On one hand, Angkor can refer to the entire empire or civilization, which covered, as you can see from this map that's from the Royal Palace in Phnom Penh, at its height, a very large portion of mainland Southeast Asia, but its heartland really was in Cambodia and the area around the modern town of Siem Reap, and ranged from about the 9th to the 15th centuries CE. So on one hand, Angkor can refer to this big empire, but more frequently when we say Angkor, what we really are talking about is this urban core that, as you can see on the map here, is near the modern town of Siem Reap. And in particular, what we call the archaeological park, the area where we have this high concentration of stone temples. And you can see this little tourist map here on your screen as well too, which is also a World Heritage Site, UNESCO World Heritage Site. And so when people say they're visiting Angkor, usually what they say is they're coming to this part of Cambodia to look at all of these beautiful temples that are here. What is also important to note about Cambodia and Angkor is the seasonality. And so because both Miriam and I are American, in the American academic system, we do our field work during what is normally the rainy season, and hopefully this little picture is animating for you. And what you can see is that there's a lot of seasonality in the climate and the rainfall in Cambodia. For part of the year, we get a lot of rain and a lot of water. And for part of the year, there's just sometimes not enough water. And so dealing with this seasonality is something that people in Cambodia, that ancient Angkorians, people across Southeast Asia, in fact, have had to deal with parts of the year where you have too much water and parts of the year where you don't have that much water. What you can see is there's in the middle of Cambodia is the Tonle Sap Lake. There's a little orange dot. I'm not sure if you can see if I move my mouse over here. That's where Angkor is. It's right on the edge of the Tonle Sap Lake floodplain, so it's a great area for farming, and the Tonle Sap Lake itself is one of the world's largest inland fisheries, so it's a great source of protein. So if you're going to establish an empire, it's not a bad place to establish it. We should also mention a little bit about the history of research that's been done at Angkor, since that definitely influences our work today. Most of the work that's been done in Cambodia since the late 1800s has been under the jurisdiction of the École Française d'Extrême Orient, or the EFEO, French School of the Far East. And these were some of the earliest scholars to come into Cambodia. When the French came in, they had a few objectives. They were trying to record the different archaeological sites that they saw in the landscape. Many of them were stone temples, and many of them were not in great condition. And so they were also attempting to shore up many of these temples, reconstruct them, do preservation and conservation. Also looking at the art styles, trying to understand art history, do dating of temples through art history, and also looking at inscriptions. So you can see a particular inscription here. Many temples had inscriptions either in stele or door jambs, and talking about who built the temples and when they were built. And so what this meant was that, and here you can see some other examples of restoration work, clearing parts of the jungle out, and done by the French. And the result of this is a very nice, what we call culture history of the Cambodian rulers. So we have a good idea about who ruled when, the years that they ruled, and in particular, which temples they might have built or added on to. So this page here is from classic kind of guidebook on Angkor, Ancient Angkor by Michael Freeman and Claude Jacques, that details all of these different rulers that we know about and the different temples that they built. But it's great, really important foundational work. We have a good history of these particular rulers, but it's definitely an archaeology that was focused on elite members of society and kings and royals. So the French directed and led most of the work until about the mid-20th century. Of course, in the 1960s and 70s, there were a lot of socio-political problems and conflict in Southeast Asia, and this bled over into Cambodia. This is a picture here of Khmer refugees at Angkor Wat from the EFEO archives. What this meant is that during this period, and especially during the period of the Khmer Rouge from 1975 to 1979, there was no archaeological research done in Cambodia. Basically, we hit the pause button in 1970, and it wasn't until the mid-1990s, and especially work done by Miriam Stark in collaboration with Ministry of Culture and Fine Arts in Cambodia, that research has started up again. So the projects that we are working on now in Cambodia, more recent anthropologically driven archaeological research and research that's taking advantage of new technologies as well too, is pretty recent in Cambodia, and because we've had to hit the pause button, maybe we're a few decades behind other parts of the world that have had this uninterrupted time to take on field work. And Miriam's going to talk a little bit. I don't know if you want to jump in now here, Miriam, actually, and mention a little bit about some of the training projects. After the Khmer Rouge period, there were only 3 Cambodian archaeologists in Cambodia left to manage this country that has over 4,000 documented archaeological sites. And so there was a huge vacuum in human resources. And since the mid-1990s, especially with work done by Miriam, there's been a major focus on trying to rebuild the indigenous archaeology program and have Cambodian scholars participate and get training so that they become equal partners and collaborators with us on our project. And so this is from 2005 as part of Miriam's Lower Mekong Archaeological Project, doing training with Royal University of Fine Arts students. And it's something that we continue to incorporate into our work now. I don't know if you want to jump in here, Miriam, or if you were going to talk about it a little more later.
No, I can jump in now.
Okay.
So I started working in Cambodia in 1995 when I was invited to join the East-West Center Royal University of Fine Arts archaeology program. And the Royal University of Fine Arts was tasked with training archaeologists. Like Alison said, there were only a few who were living and had any skills in Cambodia after the Khmer Rouge and the Vietnamese period. So the project began as a capacity building project that also folded in research. And I've been working with people from the Royal University of Fine Arts archaeology program, which is part of the Ministry of Culture and Fine Arts, since 1996. So I spent 15 years in the South on the Lower Mekong Archaeological Project, and Alison was a student and then finished during that time, and then moved up to the Greater Angkor Project in 2010. And I only agreed to collaborate with University of Sydney and Greater Angkor Project if we could bring the training with us. So training is integral to the project, and it's great because at this point, actually many of our more senior colleagues, middle-level colleagues, are people who were students in training programs back in the mid-90s. So our goal is to take the students while they're in school, give them one of the field training programs. There are a few others that are available. OPSRA trains as well, and some international organizations working at Angkor. And then to bring them in as interns when they've graduated. And if they're still interested, then once they get jobs at places like OPSRA, they work with us again. So it's a long-term investment in human resources. And so the people who we collaborate with, many of them have worked with me, and now me and Alison at different points in their career.
Great. So as we've mentioned, this would be something that Earthwatch citizen scientists would be working alongside Cambodian archaeologists and Cambodian students as part of our project. Okay, so getting back to more focus on what our research is, this is a map here you can see of what the Angkorian urban core looked like in 1979. This is a map produced by a French archaeologist named Bernard Philippe Grolier. It basically was the extent of our knowledge about Angkor during this period when there was not any archaeological research happening. And what you can see is this urban core with these large rectangles that are in black. Those are all water storage features. You can see some dikes and canals, road networks, little individual temples in the landscape, other larger temples in the center, and the large city of Angkor Thom. And this was what we knew about Angkor in 1979, but since the mid-1990s, when we've had reintroduction of archaeological research and the ability to take advantage of new technologies, this is the most recent map of Angkor now. This was published in 2007, a collaborative work by our colleagues Damien Evans and Christophe Potier, showing this 1,000 square kilometer area. And you can see we have this urban core, but now we know that it's integrated into this landscape around it, what we call a low density agrarian urban system. So we have this rural area, but it's integrated into the urban core through, you can see these canals and roads and dikes networks. And so this is a really unique facet of Angkorian urbanism. It's a unique facet of urbanism around the world, and definitely a particular part of what makes Angkor a really unique place to work. What you can see is that, yeah, this is a large area. We know that people were living in some of the central areas and that they seem to have been then living in this outer hinterland as well too. Some of our colleagues have estimated that maybe like 500,000 to 750,000 people might have been living in this area, but that's something we still need to investigate more. When the French arrived in the late 1800s, though, of course, they found many of these temples that were overgrown. This area seemed to have been abandoned. As they were investigating and relying primarily on historic texts and chronicles, there was this narrative that developed that Angkor fell in 1431 when it was attacked by Siam, and so you can see some kind of reconstructions here of what this might have looked like. What we know from archaeology, at least, is that there is not archaeological evidence for this violent downfall to the city of Angkor. We don't have evidence for like giant marauding elephants and sacking and burning of temples or anything like that. What instead seems to be happening, what we know from more recent research, is that there were some very serious environmental climatic changes that were happening towards the end of the Angkorian period. This is research by our colleagues Brendan Buckley. What you can see here is this is taken from tree ring data and tracking regional rainfall. And what they have noticed is that towards the end of the Angkorian period, there were these very serious periods of drought, decades-long droughts, that were punctuated by very heavy, wet monsoon seasons. As you saw earlier from that animated picture, the seasonality in Cambodia is quite strong and it's important. From this large map of Cambodia we have here, we can see that this network, this large urban area, is integrated through this network that was connected through canals and dikes, moving water around the landscape. And so what we think was happening is that people were modifying this large water management network within Cambodia to accommodate these decades-long droughts, and then they were getting hit by too much water from these monsoons, and it was really overwhelming their water management system. So just to give you an example, when you go to Siem Reap town, there's a very beautiful canal, a river that runs through it. This is an Angkorian, we believe Angkorian produced canal that seems to have been built post-12th century to accommodate excess water that was in the central city area, perhaps from this period of monsoon, and trying to move it out very quickly. And so we're seeing on the landscape, we have this climatic data, and then we can see on the ground, the water management network just got to be too intricate and was overwhelmed by these climatic changes, and it seems to have led or really been a major factor in the decline of Angkor. However, in 2011, I was working with Miriam and some of our other colleagues, and we did a site survey. And as we were walking around this landscape, we just kept finding evidence that people were still living here in the post-Angkorian period. We have evidence on some of the temples themselves as well too. Angkor Wat in particular never was abandoned. We have lots of evidence that people kept returning to that area. And so this idea about the Angkorian collapse, that it was sacked by the Thais, needs to get shifted and nuanced a bit more. We don't think we can't describe Angkor as being abandoned anymore. There does seem to have been a big demographic shift. The water management network was a problem, and many people did seem to move further south to the area where we have the modern capital of Phnom Penh. So we do see a reorganization and especially a relocation of the elite or socio-political center, but there were plenty of people who still seem to have been living on the landscape. And this is a question that we're interested in looking at. How many people were staying? Why did they stay? And can we look at where they were living, in particular their households, to try and understand these individuals who did stay and what they were doing in this period of climatic and socio-political stress to maintain their resiliency in these locations. So we're trying to look at these questions, look at who was living at Angkor, and especially who was living in this transition period between the Angkorian and the post-Angkorian period. And we want to do that by looking at households. So the next logical question might be, what do we know about Angkorian households? We have a little bit of information, and perhaps our best information comes from this Chinese visitor to Angkor named Jodap Guan. This book, A Record of Cambodia, is really great. It's a quick and fun, entertaining read, and he describes what Angkor was like when he visited in 1296. He describes a lot of aspects of Angkorian life, and in particular, he talks about the houses of people that people lived in, and he notes that lower status people or common people lived in houses that were smaller and made out of, had a roof made out of thatch, but larger people, or larger, higher status people might have larger houses and might have a house made with roof tiles. So this gives us some information about what the houses might have been like in terms of status, something we can look at in the archaeological record. On temple bas-reliefs, we can see examples of some of their architecture and scenes from daily life. So you can see some examples here from the Bayon Temple. This gives us more clues. And then there has been some evidence, archaeological work done on where people are living and what this was like. So our French colleague Jacques Gaucher mapped the city of Angkor Thom. You can see here he identified this grid system with mounds and depressions or ponds, this residential area within the walled city of Angkor Thom. Another one of our colleagues, Pierre Bati, and his team working at the Siem Reap Airport have also uncovered post holes and areas where people were living in this part of Angkor as well too. So we're getting bits and pieces of little clues about what daily life was like. There's also an inscription from the Temple of Prohm that talks about, in particular, students and teachers living on site within this temple enclosure as well too. So all of this gives us great clues, but it does make for pretty difficult archaeology, because now most places where people are living are covered by forest, and most house structures were made from organic materials that don't preserve well. We don't have standing house remains the way we have beautiful remains of stone temples. So how are we able to study not only and where people lived? And this is where we get to take advantage of some exciting new technology. You might have heard about LiDAR surveys that were done at Angkor. There have been 2 in the past few years. And LiDAR is a particular type of airborne laser scanning technology where they, in this case, used a helicopter and put a laser on the helicopter. The laser flies over a particular area, shoots these small laser beams out. They hit the ground and return to the laser scanner, and then they record the topography. Because so many lasers are being shot out of this machine at a particular moment, they can go in between the gaps of the trees. So some of them will hit the tree leaves, some of them will, hit surfaces of buildings and roads and water bodies, but many of them will also, in a forested area, go between the gaps in the tree leaves and hit the ground surface. And LiDAR is actually a technology that's been around for quite a while. So we know what a tree signature looks like. We can peel off the tree layer on a LiDAR return and get this really nice map of the ground surface. So what we can use that for, in particular at Angkor Wat, so here you can see an aerial photograph. This would be something like you would look at on Google Earth with Angkor Wat in the center, surrounded by the moat. You can see all around the temple is thick forested trees, but we can use our LiDAR, peel this tree layer off, and underneath have this really wonderful map of the ground surface. And what you can see here in particular is that around the temple of Angkor Wat, There's a waffle pattern of mounds and depressions that are nicely arranged. You can see hopefully also that on the right side of your screen, this extends outside the moat. And on the bottom to the south of the temple, there's some interesting square spirals that also seem to be associated. All of these features together seem to be associated with the construction of the Angkor Wat temple. And what we thought is that this area, this waffle pattern area, would be an area where people were living. And it would be a place where we could look more closely at some of these questions about what daily life was like for Angkorian people. And in particular at Angkor Wat, because this is a well-preserved temple, the landscape around the temple is well-preserved, and it has a long history of use. We know that Angkor Wat temple was never abandoned, that this would give us very long-term evidence for habitation. And we would be able to see how people were living in this particular area from the Angkorian to the post-Angkorian period and begin to answer some of our questions. As we've already discussed, this is a really collaborative project. And so you can see here some photographs of us working with our Apsara Authority colleagues. Miriam, I don't know if you wanted to add anything else here.
Yeah, I wanted to give a shout out really to Apsara, because when I proposed working at Angkor Wat in 2010, it was a little cheeky maybe. It did seem, for all the reasons Alison was talking about, like a logical first place to work in the Angkor Park. But you probably are all aware that Angkor Wat is the ancient world's largest religious complex. So it's quite sacred. It's a very important place to work. And we try to information share constantly with Cambodian colleagues generally, and to ensure that as we do our research, education at multiple levels is part of our mission. So you can see in these images that we're consulting with Apsara colleagues, but in addition to that, we do teaching of students, and some of them are also Apsara interns. And we do lectures at Apsara, so that if you were to come join us, there's a good chance that we would bring you out to Apsara for some sort of presentation from our colleagues on other work they've been doing at Angkor.
Yeah, great. So this has been really a key component of our work. Getting back to some of our more recent field work, this is a top-down view of what this area around Angkor Wat looks like. There you can hopefully see more closely this waffle pattern of mounds and depressions, and the area just to the east of the temple outside the moat, where we also have a similar enclosure with these mounds where we think people were living. This is our kind of idealized, perhaps romanticized view of what perhaps this area might have looked like. I mean, to me looks very much like a beautiful suburb that we see like around here in the Midwest, but we have each of our little houses, our grid system, each with its own little pond. This is definitely an idealized view. It's a hypothesis that we're testing with archaeology, but we could estimate that if this is really if the entire enclosure was inhabited, if each mound that we see on our LiDAR had a house on it, and each house might have had an extended family of about 10 people, which would not be unusual for Cambodia, that we could have a maximum perhaps of 2,800 or so people living within this enclosure. So it's a pretty significant number. And what we're doing now is trying to test this idea by excavating these mounds to identify, what's going on here? What are these households looking like? And what do we know about people's lives and how they're living them through archaeology? So we've done several field seasons. There was a small field season in 2010 before we had LiDAR data, and then we went back in 2013 and sampled some other areas. We're mostly working on the eastern half of the enclosure because it is a bit better preserved, and we've done a little bit of testing in that area outside the moat as well too. And then in 2015, so what we were doing, I'll say here, in our earlier field seasons were small 1 by 2 meter test trenches on a variety of mounds, trying to say, are all of these mounds habitation areas, or does some of the mounds seem to have different functions? From our excavations, the ones that we've tested, it does seem like these are primarily residential areas. And then in 2015, we went back and did a horizontal excavation of a single mound in order to more specifically answer some questions. So we went to one particular mound and we were trying to do this big horizontal excavation, so open up a large area in order to try and identify more about the kinds of activities that are taking place on the mound, kind of household activities, and see if we could uncover post holes or other evidence for what the house form might have been like. We're also testing the idea that these are areas that were occupied by non-elites. So we have this information from Joda Guan talking about house size and the material that was used to produce a house. And we could also look at the kinds of ceramics that that we're finding in our excavation to try and determine if perhaps they were elite versus non-elite people using more locally produced ceramics versus, for example, more exotic Chinese tradeware ceramics. That would give us an idea about elite status. And then we were also curious about the intensity of habitation on these mounds. So were people living there? Was this one family living in this mound year round, or was there some seasonality? So we've already talked about how there's seasonality, especially with the wet and dry seasons in Cambodia. Some Khmer Angkorian texts talk about work groups that would shift in and out of smaller temples every 2 weeks based on the waxing and waning of the moon. So we're wondering, could these be residences of people who were kind of cycling in and out, or are they more permanent? And can we tell that by looking at the archaeological data? So our 2015 excavation was in this area here that was circled. It was a place that we had done one small 1 by 2 meter trench in 2013. Here's a zoom in on that from our LiDAR data. So the purple trench in the center is the one we dug in 2013 and found a lot of great ceramic materials. So we went back in 2015 and opened up a bunch more squares on here. You can see there was one cluster of squares. That's this one here. And just going to give you a brief overview of what we found in this particular cluster. So we didn't open up enough of the mound to try and find we didn't find a clear house structure, but we found what you can see here, some possible post holes that might be the edge of some kind of structure. But we were finding a lot of interesting information about kinds of household activities, especially related, we think, to cooking. So you can see a possible hearth in one corner of this area. Fired clay and brick also seems to be another area where there was cooking happening, or some kind of pyrotechnology. And then we have a lot of pieces of sandstone, which are really interesting and something we're sort of debating about, but many of them are flat and seem to be on, I think, a surface. So they could be some kind of floor surface or pathway in, around, underneath a house. We're still trying to figure it out. What's interesting is that a lot of these stone pieces we think are being recycled from the construction of the Angkor Wat temple, because in many cases we're finding examples of decorated pieces or pieces that were partially decorated and then seemingly discarded and then being recycled by people who are living on the mounds. So this does tie together in many ways the construction of the temple with the mounds and the people who are living on them as well too. As Miriam mentioned earlier, we have a lot of technical specialists that we also collaborate with. So we've been working with Christina Castillo from University College London, and she's hoping to join us for part of our field season, at least in 2018, to continue looking at macro botanical remains. So looking through our soil to identify pieces of plant remains that we can then think a little bit more about what people are eating on the mounds or perhaps growing nearby. And so you can see these are some preliminary examples of things that she's found. So fruit rinds, some pieces from the ginger or turmeric family, rice, unsurprisingly. And then in the lower left corner, this is a Cambodian plant called trotuk, which is often used as a soup or in traditional medicine. And she found one seed from that as well too. So this is we're in the early stages of this work, but we're hoping to continue it as well. We're also finding a lot of ceramics. And so this is an aspect where maybe Earthwatch volunteers could help us clean and sort some of our ceramics. These are some of the more exciting pieces that we found. So you can see on the top is our nice little chicken water. We found out this is a chicken water dropper. It's an imported Chinese tradeware. What you can see is that little hole in the side of the chicken's head. Traditionally in China, what you do is you'd fill this piece with a little bit of water, and then as you're writing calligraphy, you might drip a few drops of water out of the hole and then use it to grind your ink and then use it for writing. We have no idea if people were using that for similar function in Angkor, but it's very interesting that this piece has made its way to Cambodia from China. You can see the tail here of what's probably an elephant effigy pot. That's a Cambodian Angkorian ceramic, but my colleagues who are more well-versed in ceramics than I am think, based on the glazing and the design, that it could have been from kilns in Buriram province in Thailand. And then this other vessel is the only complete vessel that we found in our 2015 field season. And based on the decoration and style of clay. For this particular vase, we think it came from these kilns, Chungite kilns that are near Phnom Penh. So also Angkorian made ceramic, but coming from pretty far distances to the capital. When we dig, we're going through multiple layers of soil, and so this is just a very simplified view of our profile. What we're finding with our radiocarbon dates is that our bottom layers are associated with the construction, we think of the temple and the temple enclosure, massive reorganization of the landscape associated with the construction of Angkor Wat Temple, and then occupation on top of these mounds from the 11th to 13th centuries. Then we have this really interesting gap in our radiocarbon dates so far, which seem to coincide with this period of climatic change that we mentioned earlier. But people come back. So we mentioned already Angkor Wat Temple was never abandoned. And it seems like those mounds were reoccupied by the mid-15th century. So our very top layer is what's associated with, we think, post-Angkorian habitation or use of the mounds around the temple as well, too. So some preliminary conclusions that are leading to further questions that we're hoping to address in 2018. So the mounds do appear to be occupation areas. We have evidence for some cooking. We have partial evidence for house structure. We don't know who the people are who are living here. We don't know what their occupation is. I would say that they probably have something to do with the function of the Angkor Wat Temple, but we are still investigating this question. Are they non-elites? So this is also interesting. We need more data, and we definitely need to do some more excavations. We don't find a lot of roof tiles, so it doesn't seem like these are large houses with ceramic roofs, roof tile roofs that we would associate with a more elite members of society. But some of the ceramics we're finding are unusual. And so these were also not the poorest members of society either, seemingly. So these seem to be interesting, perhaps kind of, I don't want to say the word middle class, but maybe we can think about them being something like a middle class living on these mounds. And were they short term? Well, this again, I think is an area where we still need to do more investigation. Perhaps there was some change over time. In the early, or bottom layers of the early 11th to 13th century habitation on these mounds does seem to be a bit more intensive. And when we get to the post-Angkorian period, there does perhaps seem to be more short-term occupation. But we really do need more data, and so that's why we are hoping, or we're planning to go back in 2018 and keep investigating this question. So now I'll throw this over to Miriam to talk about what we're planning next.
Okay, thanks, Allison. You'll just keep clicking for me?
Yep.
Okay, let's click. So we want to be clear that we have several funding sources for our project. It is a research project along with a training project, and for that reason, we work very closely with our Australian colleagues as part of the Greater Angkor Project. And the Greater Angkor Project is in phase 4. We worked in phase 3, what Allison described to you. As our research was all part of GAP 3, we call it, and this is now GAP 4. So GAP 4 goes on from 2018 really until 2021 at least, and the goal there is to try to understand dynamics in the post-Angkorian period. So our research design for work we'll do through Earthwatch with some funding also from the ARC is work designed to try to get these two slices of time, that is the Angkorian period and the post-Angkorian period, to try to understand changes. Allison very clearly identified what we see as a gap in occupation at Angkor Wat, and also that correlation with environmental perturbations. But what we see, as she also pointed out, is that people come back and they reuse it. So we're working as part of a larger team. There are people involved in the project who are studying the distribution of ceramics across all of Greater Angkor to see just where people moved. We know that the core, the political core, was hollowed out, but we also know that residents continued throughout this Angkorian plain. So what we're looking for are places where we can find that time slice, which is the Angkorian period and the late Angkorian period. And for that reason, we're going to look at 3 different sites. We're going to start at Angkor Wat to finish off our work and to try to get more data deposits from either the post-Angkorian period, or if we're very lucky, a period that would post-date the sort of Surya Varman explosion that changed the landscape when Angkor Wat was first built and occupied, and that Allison described. Then the next year, which would be 2019, we hope to go to Prohm where we also worked for several field seasons in Gap 3, and to finish one more field season to look at the nature of residential use of those mounds. Prohm also has a very nice grid system, and it's a little later in time. So Angkor Wat was, according to the inscriptions, was established first, and then afterwards we see Prohm, and then we have that gap. And after that, we'd like to go outside of the Angkor Park to a site which we call a peri-urban site. It was part of the greater urban area, or suburban, depending on your terminology. And we already know from Gap 3 work that we have Angkorian and post-Angkorian deposits. So, and they're very dense, and we want lots of trash. So we want to finish at Kok Babak, which is on the southern part of your screen there, because it has a very nice occupational sequence. So if you were to come with us through one of the Earthwatch field seasons, you'd either work at Angkor Wat, if we get permission from Apsara, or then at Prohm or at Kok Babak. But all of this work will then feed into our broader research interest, which is looking at what happened through time. Archaeologists are always interested really in history. We are, after all, ancient historians, and we're really interested in this sort of small scale perspective on how people use the landscape and persisted through time when we know that you have a political collapse at the center. So we'll start at Angkor Wat in 2018. We can go to the next slide, please. And we have a very clear idea of where we'd like to work. We'd like to continue excavating on the mound. Alison supervised the work in 2015. We'd also like to look at another whole area within this enclosure. Alison, if you could just put your arrow on the southwest enclosure. That's an area where we'd like to dig. We actually did excavate there in 2010, but looking for other kinds of stuff. We can't really work in the northwest, which Alison will point out with her little arrow, because it's been so impacted in the last 150 years by pagodas and more recently by tourist stands and so on. But we'd like to expand out to the southwest area. We also want to look in areas just outside the wall and before the moat, around Angkor Wat, preferably really on the northern area by the entrance and the southern area. Those would be our targets, but of course it all depends on going out and sniffing around, what we call reconnaissance, and then permission from Apsara. Okay, so the 2018 field season on Angkor Wat will be using much the same methodologies we did before, and particularly in 2015. We'll be looking for, of course, the same kinds of artifacts, but we've also got a grant proposal into National Geographic Society to support the science part of our work that isn't just archaeologists. And that would be bringing out Christina Castillo to look at our botanical remains, and Zhuang Yijie, who is a micromorphologist. So he looks at all kinds of very microscopic patterning in the particles that we call soil that we're excavating to try to see whether he can find these kind of forensic clues to how the mounds were formed, how they were used, what was in them, and so on. You can see here in this next picture what an excavation might look like. You would be involved in excavating. We do have laborers too, so sadly for them, but good for us. We pay them to do part of the really hard labor, but we do all the recording and drawing. I should add, we have a couple of absolute expert laborers who are our foremen, and they often teach everyone, including the foreigners, how to read the stratigraphy. So we'll be working with a very experienced team in the field. The other activity that will be very important for us and is maybe less glamorous, but very important, is that we have to then process all the artifacts that come out. So here you see a picture of two of our Apsara colleagues, and after ceramics have been washed and they've been sorted, then we document them. So here we've got Prohm taking photographs with help from Kumnut of the ceramics that we excavate. So everything that we get out of the ground that we want to analyze or that is archaeologically relevant, even if it's little pieces of carbonized material, we have to document. So part of the field work is also post-field work processing. One of the best parts, I think, of doing work at Angkor Wat and anywhere in Cambodia is all the work with local archaeologists. So in this case, you can see that we've got Mung Raksme working there, supervising the excavations with local laborers. Raksme worked with us, I think, first down in Takayo in southern Cambodia, I believe, one field season, and then he's now working on his master's degree at the School of Oriental and African Studies. So he's an example of an archaeologist we've worked with at different levels along the way. And it's a lot of fun. I think we can't really overemphasize how genuinely enjoyable it is to work in Cambodia with Khmers. They're just lovely people, and people are extremely interested in their heritage, quite good-natured. The heat and the bugs bother us much more than it bothers them. And we really do have fun amid the tedium that is an archaeological project. Okay, so what would our schedule look like? Well, it gets hot really early in the tropics, and so we have to be ready to go by 7:15. So we'll be up early and having a continental breakfast. We'll leave for the field site, probably in trucks and also in tuk-tuks around 7:15. People are absolutely welcome to take a break anytime they need to on the field site. We always have water available. We can have some snacks as well, but everyone breaks for lunch at 11:30. And then we do actually take a bit of a siesta because the heat is hard on everyone, and it is a hallowed Cambodian tradition to take a nap. So you can nap if you want, or you can walk around and take pictures, so on. But we get back to work by 1 p.m. We work for another 2.5 to 3 hours. That really depends on what we're excavating. If you're in the middle of excavating or drawing a feature, sometimes you just have to get it finished before you go in. We do get rains in this field during this time of the year. So sometimes the rain stops us, or sometimes we know rains will be coming and we have to get that last bit of work done to make sure that the trenches don't fill with water and our stratigraphy gets destroyed. We'll finish working though around 4 p.m. We may or may not do lab work afterwards. It depends on the preference of volunteers and how many people we have working with us. And then around 6 at the field station, we'll have dinner together. And most nights we'll have either a lecture or a film or some sort of informal chit chat. You're only with us, many of you, for 5 or 6 nights. And so we try to pack in the information. And of course, it's better not to go out on the town at Siem Reap, although they have a very lively bar scene during the week while you're excavating, because I have to be ready to go so early. So at the Institute for Field Research Studies Center where we'll be working, there's actually a room where we can show films. We'll invite people in to lecture who are local colleagues, and of course we'll give lectures ourselves. So the schedule would be that you'd work really, I think, come in on Sunday and Monday through Friday, work pretty hard, and then there will be a day off to explore or relax. We're happy to help you arrange field trips all around. We've been working up at Angkor since 2010, so we know lots of people, including trained guides, including some guides who have degrees in archaeology. And we're happy to help you out with that as well. We also encourage people to stay for more than 1 week. We'll be there for the duration, and we'd be happy to have some of you as well. Wanted to tell you just a teeny bit about our accommodations because they're truly lovely. We have always worked out of a research center in Siem Reap, but we're pleased to say that we're concluding negotiations right now to use the School for Field Studies Mekong Field Station, and you can see it in this picture. It's a real pool. I was there 2 weeks ago, and Alison and Earthwatch staff will be there in about 2 weeks. It's beautiful. It's an old guest house that didn't work for tourists, but is absolutely perfect for people coming to do research. During our academic year in the West, mostly American students come to the Mekong Field Station, and they spend a semester there on study abroad, and they're studying environment in the Mekong. So it's set up perfectly, actually, for research. It's got good Wi-Fi, and there at the bottom right corner, you can see a picture of a room, which is our movie room. We can make popcorn anytime you want. There's a little area with a volleyball net. There's a wonderful covered area with hammocks where you can take a nap, and it's not very far from anywhere. So our accommodations are beautiful and big enough that we'll be able to lure colleagues in, offer them a free meal in exchange for a lecture, and it will be a very lively, enjoyable time. Our last picture here just shows you some images from previous field seasons. Alison, that would be 2015 on the top, right?
Yep, and 2013 on the bottom.
And 2013 on the bottom. We have to confess that if you're around for the end of the field season, since we're there for the duration, we have a rip-roaring picnic, a big barbecue, and everyone gets t-shirts. It's a lot of fun. We do it somewhere in the Angkor Park. And I want to reiterate here that archaeology is serious, and we do research. We're very serious about that, but it's also a lot of fun. And people have a good time. Cambodia is just an absolutely lovely place to visit, as long as you can tolerate the climate, the heat, the bugs, and so on. We will be eating mostly Khmer food, but cooked in an absolutely sterile kitchen. And there are even health facilities, medical facilities around should you need them. Sorry, we always have some sorts of precautions we take. We make everyone drink lots of rehydration drinks on site, and we take good care of people too. So we think it's going to be a really enjoyable experience, and we like to bring in citizen scientists at this point in our research because we want you to learn about Cambodia and see why we love it and its heritage as much as we do. That's it. Thank you.
So now I guess we can take questions.
Okay. Alison, you want to take, let's see, the first one is Richard Kuzis. You want to take that question? What will be the historical? Yeah.
Hi guys, I'm going to read off some of the questions because we've got some others coming through.
Oh, okay.
Okay, that sounds great.
Sorry, I was talking, but I was muted, so that was very confusing. So just a reminder to everyone on the line as well, there's a Q&A button at the bottom, and you can type in there, and then we'll read off your questions as well. So I just want to remind people that there are a few questions. So the first one is from Richard, who is asking the historical time range that will be spanned by the 18 dig, so citizen scientists coming out then. Could you give a quick reminder?
Yeah.
I think it may have popped up on the screen right after he typed.
Yeah, so we'll be working at Angkor Wat in 2018, and that is going to be covering the 11th to 13th centuries primarily, and then the later period. If you come at the very beginning of the field season when we're excavating the top layer, that would be more 15th to 20th century, but frankly, that layer is very thin. We can go through that in a few days, and then we'll be mostly in the Angkorian period layers from the 11th to 13th century.
Awesome. Peaceful. So there's two I'm going to lump together because they're related. So Tara asked a little bit about daily life for an Earthwatch citizen scientist, which you gave a nice rundown of the schedule for. The other side of that is how do you manage the hot and wet climate during the dig, and kind of a complement to that was another question that came in asking about what's the best time weather-wise for the project. So how do you deal with the hot, and two is when do you recommend coming? And I think your teams are May, June, and July of 2018.
Can I jump in here?
Yeah, go
for it.
So the answer is the best time to come is not when we're there if you're a tourist, except if you want fewer tourists. We're in Cambodia working in the rainy season, although with climate change, it's quite variable. But it's a good time to be an archaeologist, actually, because if you want to be a tourist, you want to be there in the dry season when it doesn't rain, right? So that would be really December, especially January, February, March. It gets hotter and hotter. But if you're an archaeologist, you want to be there after the rain starts because the soil is so hard to excavate. So although we schedule our field seasons because of our academic schedules, and we're teaching here at our universities, usually till May and sometimes June, it is a better time to work, but you have to be very careful in how you manage it. So one point to keep in mind is if you're a person who comes from like Texas or the deep south, you're used to hot and humid, and it's not going to bother you, in my experience, because I've worked in Cambodia running projects for 20 years. If you're used to being in an air-conditioned climate, you're going to have to acclimate, and that will be a lot harder. Although we've seen people do it, that's why we take great care. Anytime people don't feel well, we're going to take them out of the field and bring them right back to the research center where they can be in an air-conditioned room. And of course, there's several hospitals around as well. So the main problems I've seen people run into, which we have to take care on, are heat exhaustion. We haven't had full-on heat stroke, but heat exhaustion, well, that's the main one. And it is exacerbated if you drink too much coffee in the morning We've seen that. Even my husband, who's an archaeologist and should know better, and if you have too much alcohol the night before. So we really discourage people from drinking very much if they're going in the field, not because we're Pollyannas, but because alcohol dehydrates you. So the next day you can feel bad, and the next night you'll feel worse. So a couple ways we manage: we make people drink rehydration drinks. We watch carefully and get people out of the field if they look like they're peaked. And also we try to encourage people to modify their consumption habits just during the time that they are in the field with us. Does that answer your question?
I'm just going to add a couple, can I just jump in and add a couple things?
Sure.
I'll mention that when we work, we have we invest very heavily in plastic sheets, and so we have all
true.
areas covered. I will say in 2015 we only had one, maybe two. We only had one afternoon that we had to stop early because it was raining too hard for us to work. Otherwise, we can work very well through the rain, because we have a very ingenious Cambodian engineering system with our plastic sheets. We're also working in the trees, and so what that means is that we're not we're not getting direct heat sunlight. It does help a little bit that we're in the trees. It can be more muggy and it can be a little bit more buggy for that reason, but we're not like in the we have a little bit of shade cover, I guess is what I'm trying to say. That can help.
Could I also add? There's bugs. I mean, we have to be honest about that. And for people, there's bugs. There isn't malaria in the area where we work. But some people decide they want to use anti-malarials. Honestly, I don't use them when I'm working in Siem Reap because they're kind of strong. But what we do definitely always have mosquito repellent. We encourage people to use lots of it. You can smell it on site, actually. And then the Khmers will have these little smudge fires that they burn to keep the mosquitoes away as well. So you do have to think about mosquitoes. People should be using repellent day and night. Low levels of DEET, but timed release repellent. I can even recommend Sawyer brands, which are excellent and don't seem to be too unhealthy. They let me put it on my 2-year-old. The doctors did so, and she seems fine. She's still around. So those are some ways that we manage the conditions.
Excellent. Another question that came in, it's an interesting one. Someone's curious how a career in archaeology is seen within Cambodian culture, if it's respected. Is it hard to get people, students interested in that career path?
Could I answer that first, and then Alison, you throw in? So the reason why we started the project, which was called the University of Hawaii East West Center, Royal University of Fine Arts Cambodia Project, was because there weren't very many archaeologists left in Cambodia who were alive. There were a few out of the country, and many, of course, had died. And with all due respect to the French, they did a really good job of restoration, but training was not at the top of their list. So there weren't that many trained archaeologists. When I started working in the 1990s, people in Cambodia were extraordinarily proud of their archaeological heritage. I have actually never seen another country where people are quite as proud of their archaeological heritage. And if you look at the Cambodian flag today, or at any point in the last 150 years, what you see is an icon of Angkor Wat. So for them, heritage and archaeology and nationalism are all linked. So in general, people in Cambodia are much more interested in archaeology, and particularly Angkorian archaeology, than you'll find among, say, the average American. Brits are more interested in archaeology, in my experience, than Americans. So there was a tremendous amount of interest in the past. I will say, having had some conversations just 2 weeks ago with the rector of the Royal University of Fine Arts and other people, Cambodian young people are being pulled into the tech industry and business just like everyone else. And for better or worse, you find Cambodian college students glued to their cell phones, just like you do here. So there are fewer students who enroll in archaeology now than 20 years ago, but there's still a robust number of students, and they enroll for the right reasons. So there's somewhere around 14 to 15 students a year who come in strictly to study archaeology at the Royal University of Fine Arts. And if they graduate and they do well, they get a job in archaeology. There are several culture ministries that hire them, mostly Officer Authority and the Ministry of Culture and Fine Arts.
Great.
Alison, what's been your experience, though, talking to people?
Oh, I would say that, yeah, I would say it's not so different from the United States too, where people are respectful of students and archaeologists, but it's also kind of a question of like, well, does it pay well? No, it doesn't pay well, but people do it because they love it, and so we get very passionate, very, very passionate individuals who are participating as colleagues and as students.
We love them. We just love them. Right, Alison?
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, we have to cut us off here because it's just after 4 and I want to respect everyone's time who's on the line. But thank you so much, Miriam, Alison, for taking the time to talk with us today. Thanks to everyone for their thoughtful questions that they put in. As you heard, already mentioned, you can join this project in 2018. There's 2 ways to join. There are 1-week teams and there are 2-week teams. So if you're like kind of thinking about it, you can go for a week. If you're totally ready to dive in with both feet, sign up for a 2-week team. I think you'll have a lot of fun in the field with these ladies, and all of the staff, I'm sure, just as interesting to work with. If you had friends who are interested in listening to this webinar, it is going to be available online, and we'll send that link around, and also keep an eye on our YouTube channel. That's where it'll be. There'll be the next webinar will be this fall, so keep an eye on your email inbox for more information about that one. And I hope everyone has a wonderful afternoon or whatever time of day it is where you are.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.